In the whole month of October, I've been telling stories that have a little bit of a fear factor to them, stories that are a little scary. And I want to tell a story today that is really not suitable probably for younger children. This is okay for teenagers and it's okay for adults, but it's something that happened to me. It was the most traumatic experience that I ever had, at least up until that time, and maybe even since that time. I don't remember ever having this terrible of an experience of trauma in my life until this particular day. And I was working at the hospital. It was a mental hospital. And in the bottom part of one of the buildings, they had a place where when patients died, they took their bodies down there and put them in it's called the morgue. And they had drawers. They would pull a drawer out. It was a slab, and the dead body would be laying on that slab. They would push it back in. And Mr. Blanton, the man that I worked for there at the hospital, was responsible for keeping repair work done on televisions and other things in the hospital. But he also was responsible for any kind of repair work in the morgue. And so one particular day, we went to work. In fact, it was the last day that I ever worked there. The last day I ever spoke to Mr. Blanton. He told me, he said, well, there is a leak in the cooling system down in the morgue, and we need to repair it. Said there's the coolant that keeps it cool down there is leaking out of one of the lines. And I don't know to this day whether he was telling me the truth or not, but he took me down into the morgue and he pulled open this drawer, this slab, this shelf, and there was a dead body on it. And he told me, he said, now what we've got to do, he said, you need to get up and lay down on top of this body, and then I'm going to push the drawer to just a little bit, and you feel along the back there's a line, a copper line that runs through there, and you feel, and you'll be able to feel if there's gas blowing out of it, if that's where the leak is. And I looked at that dead body, and I looked at Mr. Blanton. I said, well, no, I'm not going to get on top of that dead body. And he said, well, I'm too big to do it, and you're small, and it just makes sense. Now, I don't know why he didn't suggest, or I didn't suggest, well, why don't we move the body? But we didn't. And he said, well, look, if you don't do it, you'll lose your job. I'll fire you. And I said, well, I don't want to lose my job, but I don't want to lay down on top of this dead body. But he kept on until I finally said, okay. And so I climbed up on top of this dead body, and it was the most frightening experience, just laying on a dead body. It felt so different than anything I'd ever felt, of course. And so I was reaching back to try to feel of that line he was talking about, which I don't even know if it was really there or not. And he started shutting the drawer. And he had told me he was going to push it part way too, but all of a sudden the thought hit me, what if he closes this drawer and I'm in here in the dark? And before I could even get that thought out, he closed the drawer, completely closed it, and there I was in the dark, and I was laying on top of a corpse, and I was screaming, help, help, let me out, let me out. And I could hear Mr. Blanton outside laughing, just laughing. And I thought, I wonder if he's going to just leave me here. Well, of course, I don't know how long he kept the drawer closed. It probably wasn't but 10 or 15 seconds, but it seemed like about an hour to me. And finally, he opened the door, he opened the drawer, and I jumped off of it. I was crying, of course, by this time. I was just terrified. And I screamed at him, "What in the world? What do you mean?" And he was just laughing so hard. Well, I quit that day. I told him, I'm through working with you. I won't ever work for you again. And I wouldn't even let him take me home. I lived 2 miles from where the hospital was, and I walked all the way back home because I said, I'm not riding with you. And then on the way home, I thought, should I tell my mother? And I thought, well, no, because if I tell her, she's going to be so angry. And so I didn't tell anybody for a long time. But that experience had such a traumatic effect on me that for years after that, just the thought of a dead body would just terrify me. And even to this very day, I'm 75 years old now. So this happened 60 years ago. And even to this day, when I go to a funeral, I can't reach out and touch the dead body because of that traumatic experience. So I would just say that things that happen to us when we're young can have an effect on us for the rest of our life if they are very, very frightening experiences. So I hope that none of you ever have that kind of an experience. And I will say that I have preached 1,000 funerals since that time. And I do have a great sense of respect and grief for people who've lost a loved one. But every time that I'm in the presence of a dead body, that experience comes back into my mind.